Good afternoon, HTGR Realty, coming to you live. I'm going to run back to my office, so I'm going to mute this and we'll begin the meeting immediately.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to get started on the commercial lease agreement. This agreement is the CAR agreement. It's not AIR. So first off, we have to start with an agency disclosure and then the tenant representation and broker compensation agreement. So I've pulled this up just prior to the lease. So you see there's a TRBC, and you can see here you can check for commercial property. So this CAR form is good for residential as well as commercial. And the beginning date I put on this one is 5/1 because I had already started showing them property in this example, and ending on 7/6 because I'm pretty sure I'm going to be able to get that property for them. The location, this one goes only by cities. So we're going to look at San Dimas and Glendora and additional tenant preferences. You could check any of these that may apply. I didn't check them because on a commercial, usually you're going after more than a 1-year lease, at least, 3 to 5 years. Okay. So amount of compensation, I put 4% for the total rent payments. And remember, on a commercial lease, a lot of times there's rental abatement or free rent. You don't get paid commission, of course, on the rental abated months. So sometimes you want to structure your lease to cover that. For instance, if I had a 3-year lease, but 3 months was free, I may want to write the lease as 3 years and 3 months so that I get my full 3-year commission. So that's just one of the tips, that we do is if we're giving free rent, we're going to write the lease a few months higher to cover the free rent so we get our full commission for the 3 years. Okay. So here it's the same as the residential. If the tenant is not going to pay the compensation or they cannot, you need to check this box. So you need to talk to them about that. Like maybe the property owner will pay a percentage or 2% and you'd be responsible for 2. But if they say, hey, I can't do that, then you do need to check the box. Okay. And then you would take whatever the lessor was going to pay. Okay. So how do you do that? You're going to check with the listing agent and ask them regarding concession or commission, what the property owner is willing to pay, or, if they have any idea about that. And then when you submit your letter of intent, you can write that commission right into your letter of intent, even though it's non-binding. Okay. But if the tenant's not paying, make sure to cover them here. And this one's a lot easier than the other one. And then it's just a 2-pager. Then the tenant just signs and dates it, and the agent signs and dates it. Okay. So. Commercial lease agreement. We're going to go into that. Okay. So these are fairly simple compared to maybe AIR is longer. But we're going to go over the CAR agreement. Some brokerages prefer AIR, so it's always good to brush up on AIR. And generally on a commercial lease, just as residential, the listing agent will be writing the lease agreement. So I would probably say that, 60% are going to write in AIR if it's a big commercial firm, but you have other firms that are okay with the commercial lease agreement from CAR. So when you talk to the listing agent, you can ask them, is it going to, what kind of lease form? And they're going to say CAR, AIR, or that the lessor has their own lease document. A lot of your big lessors will have an attorney drafted lease agreement that they use on all their properties. Okay. So first, the date prepared, the owner, the tenant, the address, and here is the percentage. I put 5% in this example of how much space in the entire property does that tenant's unit occupy. So in this case, it's 5%. And I always put Exhibit A. Why? Because if there's a floor plan, I like to attach it. And the floor plans should always, if you're making the floor plan, there should always be a disclaimer on it that these are approximate, made by a third party. So you want to make sure that you annotate that at the bottom of your form. Okay. So the term begins June 1st in this example. It's going to end 5/31/29. So it is a 3-year lease, and I always end them around the end of the workday so they have time to move out and get all their stuff. Month to month, I probably wouldn't want to do because the commission would be very tiny on a month to month lease. So you want to try to do, like a multi-year lease. Renewal or extension terms, if that is the case, you could put 1 3-year option to extend, or you can attach an addendum to take care of that. Okay. So here on base rent, you have options here. You have number 1, where they can pay the same amount per month for the term of the agreement. Usually if it's multi-year, that's not going to apply because there will be an increase in rent. Number 2 is they pay X amount per month, and then it increases with the CPI. So that's up to the property owner if they want to increase it per the CPI. As long as they know how to do that, no problem. But in most cases, in the leases I deal with, there is here a set amount of increase. So on this form, it's nice they've given you 3 years where you can up the rent here. But if not, you would put in accordance with right here, the attached rent schedule, and outline all years and the amounts. So you see here, we started out at $3,200 per month, commencing on June 1st, and it ends. The next year is $3,296, so that's a 3% increase. And finally, the third year is $3,395, and that is a 3% increase. So you do need to discuss this with the property owner. How much of an increase per year are they looking for you to write in? And when you are writing an LOI, make sure that you are covering in your letter of intent, which is non-binding, but it's a good way to get your terms out that you're expecting or that your tenant's expecting. Make sure that you write in what the annual increase would be. Okay. So don't forget to do that when you're writing your LOIs. The payment shall be made to the landlord. And then here's the address. Now, in this case, I just put in early possession, 5/25/26. So if everything's locked and loaded, the lease is signed, the insurance cert is in, and the cashier's check for the first month and the security deposit, we can deliver keys. You cannot deliver keys unless all of that has occurred, especially, sometimes we have the money in the lease, but we don't have the insurance cert. So please don't deliver keys without an insurance certificate because that's protective of all parties, okay? So this one I checked that they're not obligated to pay rent other than base rent. So they're getting these days free to come in a little bit early and start moving. But sometimes this isn't filled in. So a lot of times we're not giving early possession at all. So I just filled this in to show you where you could do that if your property owner so desires. So tenant agrees to pay $6,400 as a security deposit, and if the base rent increases, then the deposit shall increase in the same proportion as the rent. Now you can check that or not on lesser term leases. A lot of times that's not going to happen. So you just talk to the property owner and ask them if they want that checked. Now, the security deposit will always be determined by the property owner based upon a review of their financials and creditworthiness. So in most packages for commercial, what the landlord or property owner will look for is a copy of a government issued ID. It could be a passport, a driver's license, a fully completed and signed application, because that gives who's ever running the credit the authority to run the credit. They're going to look for 2 years of tax returns if they're self-employed, and or um, 3 months of current pay stubs. So sometimes even when they provide pay stubs, they're going to want those 2 years of tax returns. And they're also going to look for 2 to 3 months of bank statements so they can make sure they have the startup funds and all of that required. And then that is up to the property owner to determine if they're worthy, credit worthy and financially worthy, and how they screen people. And they will run the credit. Generally, they'll review everything first, and at the end, they'll run the credit. Credit cost is going up. I don't use Rent Spree. We have other people that run the credit, but it's anywhere from $45 to $55 per applicant, okay? So if the applicant is, in this case, it's an individual, but let's say it was not an individual and it was a corporation, remember, you will need full documentation on who's ever going to guarantee that lease. So when there is a corporation, LLC, or anything like that, you're going to need a guarantor. And it's generally going to be one of the partners, the managing member, but just remember that they will need to fill in the whole package. Now, I have a commercial application that pertains only to the corporate side, and we don't run credit on the corporate side, only on the guarantor, but it gives the property owner some information about the corporation. And I also always go to California Secretary of State, pop that name of that corporation in, and print the last document filed so I can make sure that we are indeed with the individual that is authorized to sign on behalf of that company. Sometimes it won't be there because it is from another state, like maybe Delaware. So in that case, you would ask the other agent to please provide the document so that you can verify and provide to the property owner that they have the right signer for a corporation. Okay. So let me see, let me come down here. So payments, you're always going to come in with the first month, and then of course the security deposit. And you always want to do a little bit ahead of the lease, or in this case, they were going to have some early occupancy. So the due date would be the Friday before that Monday they were going to early occupy. Okay. So this should always be done in a cashier's check. When we write instructions to the other agent or perhaps the tenant, if we're dual, we always mention that it needs to be in form of a cashier's check. Here's the amount, and here's who you'll write the cashier's check out to. So go that extra step and write that email, because people really appreciate that they're not thumbing through the lease draft and all that. Just write it out for them so it's really easy for them to get that cashier's check. So parking. In this scenario, the tenant is only entitled to first come, first serve unreserved parking. There are no reserved spaces in this parking lot, but if there were, you put in the appropriate numbers. The right to parking is included in the base rent, so there's not an additional charge for them coming in and using the first come, first served spots, okay? So there are some types of businesses like medical that when they're trying to get business permits through the city, there must be X amount of parking spaces per thousand. So when you're working with tenants, make sure they're checking with the city regarding their business license, because there's certain types of businesses where the city will say that they need to make sure there's X amount per thousand of parking spaces, okay? And where do you get that information? You would ask the property owner or the property owner's agent for that information, okay? And always when you're working with a commercial tenant, do remind them to check with the city for their use at that particular site, and parking and all that, because the city will give them that information. Sometimes you think the zoning is one thing and the city has either upgraded or downgraded. So you need to make sure that they're checking for their specific use at that address. They just simply go to the counter, or if they can get somebody to answer the phone, call in. Okay, but that's up to the tenant to do. So additional storage is not included in the base rent because we want them to store in their unit. So storage is permitted as follows: in unit only, something like that. So we don't want like storage sheds or stuff like that on most properties. So I always just check it's not included. So late charge is a big deal. When you are drafting this, make sure you are speaking to the property owner. How much of a late charge do they want to put in? Uh, and so in this case, I think I put 5%. It could be 3%, but put in an amount here. Don't leave this blank. You want to have a late charge there so that if they are late, it does, it helps the property owner to collect some late charge fee because maybe they have a mortgage payment, so we need to be really cognizant of that for the property owner as well. So condition of the premises, the tenant has examined the premises and acknowledges that it's clean and in operative condition. If they had any exceptions, they would note them here. And the items listed shall be dealt with in the following manner. It could be property owner to paint or whatever prior to move in. Okay, so operative doesn't really mean like fluffing it up with paint and stuff, but if a tenant wanted to write that to ensure that it gets done, they certainly could. Normally on painting and stuff like that, we do it outside of the lease, and then we have them go back uh, and look at the unit once the work is concluded. Maybe there was a deep cleaning, painting, ceiling tiles were replaced. So if you're doing stuff like that that just pretties up the unit, make sure they go back and look at it, because there's nothing worse than trying to deliver a unit on the delivery day and then they're not satisfied with the condition, which we just had happen. So make sure that they're looking at it prior to them signing that lease, okay? If it's at all possible. If not, you can get your lease signed and then manage with who's ever responsible for the cleanup to go ahead and do that. In this case, property operating expenses will not apply to this paragraph. So will not apply to this lease, excuse me. So I've checked the box. So the tenant agrees to pay landlord's estimated monthly property operating expenses, including common area. So in this case, I'm looking more at a modified gross lease. So I've checked that this does not apply 15. So the premises are for the sole use as. Make sure you always have this filled in: insurance agency and general office use. Even if it's a CPA firm, I always put and general office use because of course they will be using it for general office as well. In maintenance, they've defaulted it where the car thinks it should go, but you need to look at these and check them over if it should go to the other party. So in A, the tenant is shall professionally maintain the premises, including heating, air conditioning, electrical, plumbing, and water systems, if any, or if checked, it goes to the landlord. Generally on commercial, the interior of the unit is maintained by the tenant. So if there is an HVAC unit an HVAC unit covering that premises, you would certainly want to know the tonnage, the age, how the maintenance gone on it, because if your party is the tenant is responsible for it, that could be costly. So you always want to be asking those kind of questions. Sometimes the building has a huge AC on top of it that covers the whole building. So you need to find out who's responsible in those cases and make sure that you understand so that when you're explaining it to your client, they'll feel confident, okay, in signing the lease. So the next one, tenant shall keep glass, windows, and doors in operable and safe condition. This is pretty standard that the tenant's responsible for that. I believe there's even some plate glass window insurance or something like that that they can have that's very inexpensive in the big scheme of things on an insurance policy. And finally, C, the landlord shall maintain roof, foundation, exterior walls, and all common areas. And maybe there's something else. If you needed to add something, you could add it. Common areas will include, by the way, the parking lot. So you don't need to add in parking lot. It will be included in common area. Okay, and that's always a landlord thing on these types of leases anyway. This is an office building in this example. So the signs, the tenant will authorize the landlord to place a for sale or for lease sign on the premises within 90 days preceding the termination of the agreement. Just to show you an example, I checked 60 days. You can leave it at default, most people do, or you can amend it to 60 or, however many days your client is wishing to have checked in there. Normally, they're not going to pay too much attention to this type of paragraph. It's usually our job to point it out and say, oh, we can leave it at the 90-day default, or if you prefer, I'll put it at 60 days. Because the property owner does need to place for lease, for sale signs when they need to. Possession, if the landlord is unable to deliver possession of the unit within 60 calendar days after the agreed commencement date, the tenant may terminate this agreement by giving written notice, and the tenant will be refunded the rent and security deposit. However, I think 60 days is a long time. I think it's a super long time if somebody's like, hey, I need my unit, So I put 30 days, but again, that's up to you and your client in discussions. Or you could even put 20 days. I think 60 is just a long window. Have I ever seen it happen that a property owner could not deliver the unit? I personally have not. I'm sure it's happened, but I haven't seen it. Okay. So I just, as a precaution, I like to take that down at least in half. Okay. So they tell the tenant the obligations for vacating the premises. They give, the unit back in the condition it was given to them, clean, give copies of keys and all that kind of things to the property owner, give written notice to the landlord of their forwarding address. And why is that? Because the property owner still has the security deposit, so they'll go in and inspect the unit and then return the security deposit in full or a portion. Okay. So insurance is really important. Usually on the commercial ones that I work on, there's at least, because some of them are restaurants, 2 to 3 million insurance policy. And Peter can explain that more. But for a small office, I always just put $1 million for the liability. And this paragraph says that they need to name the property owner as an additional insured. That's very important. So when you write out an email to your client or to the tenant or to the other agent, make sure you're referencing what they need to do for that insurance cert. Okay. Like they need to name the landlord or the property management company, in some cases, both of them, as additional insured.
Yeah, I have a comment on the insurance, Michelle. Yeah, for the insurance that the tenant has to buy is very important. Make sure that they understand that while the landlord covers the liability insurance and also the fire insurance, it does not cover the content of the premises. So they have to do that on their own. If they have expensive items, equipments and stuff like that, they have to buy their own insurance. And then also, for residential tenants where they don't really want to buy additional insurance, then maybe as a landlord you can carry the renter's insurance, which is minimum the expense, and but it's very good for the landlord as a peace of mind, so that when something happens, that you can cover the losses sustained by the tenants. Okay, so there's a difference between the commercial tenant and the residential tenant. Commercial tenant, I think you should insist that they should have the insurance that's stipulated in the agreement. But for the residential, if you only have a few $100s or $1,000 rent, and they don't want to have additional expenses, then you can maybe buy the renter's insurance to just cover the landlord's liability. Okay?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I never fill in, Peter, I don't fill in what the landlord insurance policy should be. I always leave that blank.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't feel
You don't, yeah, right,
I need to because of course they're gonna insure their building.
right.
Michelle, may I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
This is Catherine. Wanted to find out what about the insurance? The insurance, do the client have to pay for they pay for their own insurance. They don't have to pay for the owner's insurance, right?
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
Okay. Now I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. And that's a good question because the keys cannot be delivered to the tenant until they give the landlord or property owner this certificate. Because they won't give you the keys. It could even be past lease date. If you haven't conformed with that, most landlords are not going to give you a key because they need to make sure that you have your insurance. And we have ran into that issue where we've had to wait and come on, let's get this done, you know. So, okay. This is really important, and a lot of times people don't realize this construction related accessibility standards. The landlord states that the premises have or have not been inspected by a certified access specialist. In all cases that I've been involved in, it's have not, no problem to check that because normally you don't have that done. You don't have a report on it. So you're going to check have not. This is more for the people preparing the lease, but also for those of you representing tenants, you should always look to this box to make sure they've at least filled it out. Because if it has been inspected, then they need to provide the report to the tenant. Okay. Okay. See, if you look at B, all these questions pertain if the premises have been inspected by CASP. Okay. So make sure you look back here and make sure that they've filled that out. So when a tenant comes into a unit and sometimes they're going to do some upgrades to the unit, you know, they're getting new business license and all that. So if the tenant's use or their upgrades cause accessibility laws to kick in, which I've seen like on back doors, I've seen some weird things over the years where the tenant had to make it accessible, like the door needed to be widened and stuff like that. That would be the tenant's responsibility. So once they take possession of that unit, interior wise, it's usually their job and their responsibility to make sure it's accessible. And I've seen it once where they enlarged a back door, even though the front door was wide enough, they still made them do that. Luckily, it wasn't a big expense. But so when you are leasing a unit, generally the property owner takes care of the exterior accessibility requirements and the tenant takes care of the interior, just so you know, okay? So mediation is already built in to the agreement. Arbitration of disputes, that is up to the property owner and the tenant if they wish to go to arbitration. So you would initial these. I know Peter's always said that the arbitration is usually retired judges or maybe an attorney. They can be, you know, $1,000 an hour. So arbitration can be quite spendy. And so you do want to think about it before initialing. Don't just blindly initial, but have a discussion and make sure that your client understands, okay? So that you want to put your agency here. In this case, we represent both the tenant and the landlord. And then back here, the entity, the tenant is not an entity, they're an individual. But coming down here, the landlord is an entity. So we put this here and the name of the entity, who is authorized to sign on behalf of that entity. Now remember, I've already checked the document on the Secretary of State website. So I know Scott Dean is the managing member because it's written on that document. So you want to make sure you're always helping the property owner and pulling that document. If you can't pull it, ask the tenant for the document showing who is authorized to sign on behalf of that corporation or entity. And then even if you're dual, please fill this all in, you know, all the way, not just one of them. I always like to see this completely filled in so there's no question on who's representing who. And let me go back. I'm going to show you guys something else. Now, the other day when we were training, since these are fairly new forms, and I know I promised to send them out to a few people, which I will, I just want to let you know that the AIR did make a buyer broker exclusive representation agreement, and they made a non-exclusive one. So in their forms, you either use one or the other, whichever type it is. And so, because people didn't know that these had been dropped into AIR, they have indeed. So if you're working an AIR contract, use their buyer broker exclusive or non-exclusive representation agreement. And then you always want to put an agency disclosure. Now I wanted to show you guys one thing about this one on 1.9, seller to pay, applicable only if checked. So if the tenant says or the buyer, excuse me, now we're on a buyer. If the buyer says, I'm not going to pay your commission, I can't pay that, then you need to check this box. And it says broker and buyer intend for the seller of property to pay 100% only applicable completed of the broker's commission. So whatever your share is, 100% of 3% or whatever it is, make sure you got this box filled in and add an agency disclosure always. Okay. And then they have a non-exclusive one here, but you're always going to want to try to be exclusive. And then they have that same box here. Okay. So I just wanted to bring that up that AIR has dropped those in, and I will email them. I think there was 3 people, Catherine, Kathy Wong, and Oscar, who wanted a copy of these. I will be sending those out today.
I also want it to
Oh,
Diana.
Diana. Okay, I'll write that down.
Thank you.
And then I'm not gonna like white out Shumei's name or anything, but you guys all know not to use forms with other agents' name on it. So you would take the name out, because we don't want their names on the forms, you know, if they're not the ones managing the deal.
Michelle, may I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
Like now you say that AIR has both exclusive and non-exclusive. How did they have it before? Did they have it
They
just
didn't
one
have
page?
one. Okay, so
They did-
before, no, because remember the buyer broker agreement kicked off first in residential. Okay. It
Okay.
wasn't at the beginning, it wasn't in commercial transactions, and then they brought it into the commercial arena as well, which we all knew they would for a buyer. So once that happened, then AIR made the forms and dropped it in because they're strictly commercial forms, you know.
Right.
They're a few months old, so that's why some people don't realize that that's there, that those have already dropped in.
But I mean, when an agent was working with the client, did they have to write it in, say exclusive or non-exclusive before they did this?
No, AIR never had these. These are new within the last 6 months, let's say. But AIR did it on 2 different contracts, either exclusive or non-exclusive. They never just had one. And these are new forms. Okay, so these dropped in. Wow, I'm crazy. These dropped in August 21, 2025, so it's not that new.
Right, and that's why I'm asking, how did they do it? Did they have, when they were filling out the sheet, did they automatically say this is exclusive for the agent to work with this client, or non-exclusive? Did they have to write it in if it didn't say it?
No, you have to use the appropriate contract because you have to talk to the client first and say, hey, I'm going to exclusively represent you. Then you only use the exclusive agreement.
Okay, I got that, babe. But
Yeah.
the way you said it, I thought they didn't have the forms saying exclusive exclusive and
Oh,
non-exclusive.
yeah, sorry, I was being confusing, but yes, you have to use one or the other with an agency always.
Okay, gotcha. I got you, because I was wondering about that. How did they do it before?
Yeah, this is new. And in fact, if agents in commercial, that do both haven't done a deal for a while, we have to keep educating people that these forms are in AIR.
Okay,
And then if you're on car, you just use the BRBC and check it to commercial. So,
okay, gotcha.
yeah. Is there any questions?
No, that was it, because that was a little confusing the way you said it at first,
Yeah,
you know?
excuse
Okay,
me. Yeah. And then I will go back and retrain on the AIR purchase agreement. I'm just not quite there yet for myself.
okay,
I will do that again because that will be a 2-part training session and it's pretty intense and it could be a bit dry, but it's good information. So I'll prepare for that in the next month or two and we will do AIR purchase agreement.
okay.
Any comments from anybody or Peter?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
If nobody has any questions or anything further to ask, I thank you for your time. I will send out these agreements to those who've asked for them. And then we will see you on Monday. And I hope you all have a very good weekend.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, I'll go in the meeting now in the other room.
What meeting?
All right. Bye-bye.